This is jlhmac for OP Poker, and today we're going to be looking at a session review played by one of our community members, anuj22. So let's just jump straight into the action. Alright, first hand we got 9-3 off. I would expect this to just go in the bin regardless of the action, even though we only have 2 power points between us. Even if you were to be playing a normal, say, spin and go, this would be a fold. But position is even more of importance in power up, so I'll definitely fold. We make a limp, which I'm not particularly happy with. Quite hard to be playing from this position. We hit our middle pair and just immediately decide to lead out. This could be alright of a play, depending on how you play later streets. I think that checking is also reasonable. It's a spot where I don't think it really matters what you do as long as you don't fold. But I don't think you should be limping it in the first place with the 9-3. You're going to get in a lot of trouble against aggression. So King 10 we definitely want to open. Anuj decides to make it to 2x, which is perfectly fine, but I think you can make it larger sizing, especially right now when people are playing too wide. The small blind folds and we get to the big blind. Let's see what he does. He makes the call. We flop top pair on a paired board. Paired boards are a great spot to be bluffing in general, because it's very hard for people to be attacking back and using power cards. Power cards can't really help them that often to get the nuts unless they particularly hit the trips, which means that it's a lot less likely they're going to hit 2 pairs and such. So you can make a lot more bluffs in these spots. But in this particular hand we actually have something. So I would prefer either a small bet or a check. The check would be to protect the king, but from a disintegrate, but we still do kind of have some showdown value, even if he does use disintegrate. And the pot is so small that if he does decide to use it, it's not the biggest deal. So I think I would like a bet of about a quarter pot, but checking is also fine. So we decide to make a half pot bet. I think half pot is making it much more reasonable for him to play power cards, because you've now put, which is like 7 big blinds. It's perfectly reasonable for the big blind to now use power cards, so he can fold out the next few orbits and just get his power points back. So I think this is slightly too large. Joker Chef is thinking about it and makes the fold. So we go to the next hand. Alright, so now we have ace queen off. We're facing a button open and a call from the small blind. It's very hard to be playing in three-way pots. A lot of the time you will end up being quite passive, all 3 players, because you're just exposing yourself as soon as you bet. So we decide to make a free bet. I like the sizing. It's big, and it's just about big enough to make to get some sort of fold equity, but it's not totally committing yourself to the pot. Anuj decided to play X-ray pre-flop before he made the free bet, which makes a good amount of sense. I personally would use X-ray later on, but I think it's fine to use it now. I would use it in case people did call my free bet, but given the state of the games right now, of course they are going to call the free bets or raise it. So seeing the free and the jack is a good sign. It makes it a lot easier to make the free bet. So the button plays scanner and then calls. He did not like what he saw, and the small blind is now using clone to get the scanner, and he also uses scanner. So we see a fairly wet flop, but it does not connect with either player, who have both used power cards. We decide to clone the scanner, which I don't particularly like. I think we would want, because both players have one card already exposed, if they were to continue in the pot, it's very likely, because these exposed cards have not hit, that they will use either upgrade or reload. So I would wait with the clone and use it so that we can have a good combination for engineer and upgrade, or engineer and reload. Anyway, we decide to immediately use scanner in a freeway pot. The pot is very big, that's for sure. But now using scanner with at least one person to act afterwards is very dangerous. Of course, we're going to keep what we see, but the fact that we do like what we see is quite an issue, because the the button could just decide to take it away, which is very possible given how they've all been playing their cards on early streets. I mean, considering he has the 3 of hearts, it's very likely that he could do something like a reload, and then he would get the ace, which would be disastrous. It checks through, which is great. It's almost definite now we've got the best hand. Unless either player has Jack 7 or 3-7. So quite unlikely, given that it was free bet. So we can definitely go for a value bet on the river. I would be looking at making it somewhere around 300 chips, maybe 400. A very small bet that so if they do use upgrade or reload and then raise us back, we can definitely look at folding if we need to. But definitely betting of some kind is necessary. We take it down though. We're so far ahead of both their ranges. So we have 10-8 off, and we decide to make a min raise. So if you go here, we have our own pre-flop charts that we use as a reference point, and 10-8 is close but not quite there. In general, if we can move it past, right. In general, when we have a PowerPoint disadvantage against our opponents, so in general, if we have PowerPoint disadvantage against our opponents, we want to be even tightening up that range. Now this next hand we have 2s on the button, which is one of the hardest hands to play. Low pocket pairs are very hard to play, but still I think it's worth giving it a go. In the future we may realize that the expected value of these low pairs is so bad that you really don't want to play it, but for now I think, given the nature and quite passive approach you have to take to the game, oftentimes just getting the pair to showdown will win the pot. So we get X-rayed and exposed 2 of clubs, and our opponent decides to flat, and then he decides to disintegrate the ace, which I'm not really sure why he would do that. Maybe he's trying to get it out of his hand in some regard. It doesn't make much sense at all. Now he uses EMP and goes all in for 4 times the pot. So, not sure. He's just wasting points, basically. It's an easy fold now, and we get on with the next hand. So this next one, we have pocket jacks against a button open, and a small blind call. Obviously, given that we got a really premium hand, we're going to make a free bet. But the question is to what size. Now, I think it's perfectly reasonable to just jam all in, because if the opponents were to have a hand like, let's say, ace-5, and now use cards like engineer, they still only have a possibility of free cards to hit the ace, and oftentimes they'll see a 5 and then end up calling the all-in anyway, just because they have hit their pair of 5s. This has happened so often, and it's definitely reasonable. But some people are saying to me that jacks might not be strong enough. Kings, queens, and aces definitely are, but jacks is always that borderline hand, isn't it? So making a smaller free bet is also reasonable, I think. We get it through against the button, and now small blind's in a quite tough spot. He decides to play engineer, and this is great for us. We see 3 cards lower than our jack, and basically whatever he picks, unless he's hit a set, we're happy with. He makes the call and goes all in. Well, we have a few options here with our jacks. I think that I personally would just flat call. If you're using engineer, you're trying to find a jack, I guess, or a queen to upgrade into queen jack, but then you're using a lot of power points for something that probably doesn't help that much. So I think I would just immediately just call the all-in. Picking out the jack to hit a set is quite nice, but I don't think it's necessary in general. I think you're just going to be against the 10 nearly all the time. So yeah, I wouldn't waste it. We now heads up. We've got a small point disadvantage, but a huge chip advantage. So given that the blinds are still quite small, we're in a really great spot. Personally, right now, because you only have 7 points, I will be playing a lot tighter from the small blind heads up. Even though we've seen 2 pots where he's been quite tight, they just might have been really bad hands. So I don't think there's enough evidence to start really attacking him for being weak. Given the fact he's got the 15 power points, I would be playing, maybe the worst hand I would play here would be something like 10-7 or 10-8 off, and I would go for a limp size as well. I don't think raising achieves too much. You don't want to build the pot and then make it more reasonable for him to use the power points. So we see a flop of ace-2-3. It's one that we can definitely see bet on, given that we have our gut shot. But the fact that he's able to use combinations and we don't, we can't. We can only use upgrade, engineer, or scanner. We can't use them all together. So we have to be a little bit more cautious. I think that making a c-bet though is pretty nice. I mean, let's say he has a hand like 6-7. It's going to be very hard for him to improve. There are a lot of hands that don't connect with this board, so making it just a small size to just take the folds is quite nice. We decide to check it back. And now we make a very large bet on the turn, a delayed c-bet. So now we're basically repping an ace that didn't want to get disintegrated on the flop. Given that he's not shown any sort of form of aggression, I guess it's fine. It's just a line that I personally wouldn't take. It's a spot where we kind of need to know what his c-bet range is in the first place to determine his delayed c-betting range. But I can't say that it's going to be a terrible play in the long run. Our opponent decides to use Intel, which is not the best play. I mean, if he wants to use it at any point, he should have used it pre-flop, in my opinion. He makes the call, and we see the 7 of diamonds roll out on the river. Now it's very unlikely that you want to bluff. If he's used intel, he knows what the river card is, and he makes the call. I see no reason why he would want to fold on the river in general. Maybe a smaller portion of hands, but that's it. Using upgrade in this case has made us hit the nuts, but I think that given that he can see what the next card is, I would suggest just giving up the hand completely. But now you've hit the straight, it doesn't make sense to do anything other than to value bet. Unfortunately, we run into a flush, so that's not ideal. And now we're in a spot where he has a huge PowerPoint advantage on us, and we have not the best combination of cards and not even that much of a chip advantage. So it's going to be a difficult game from now on. So now he just directly goes all in. We have to use scanner, I think. If we see a 10 or an ace, we're definitely calling. If we don't see anything, I think we have to make the fold. Given that he's just straight gone all in, you can't be folding there with the scanner. I mean, if you do see an ace, which you will do often enough, you're going to be winning the pot like most of the time. So now we have 8-3, and again we have a PowerPoint disadvantage against the big blind, so we can only use one of our cards. We decide to make a limp, but I don't think or agree with that. The reason is that our hand is just so weak. In a normal situation, like a spin and go, we would be maybe limping it, and sometimes against more aggressive people, folding it. So now that we have an extra disadvantage, that he has lots of power points, I think it's even more of a reason to think about making a straight fold pre-flop. Anyway, we decided to limp and get bet into for pot size. It's quite a nasty spot, because if we were to say disintegrate the 9 to give ourselves top pair, we're now at complete mercy to him. We have no more power points to play. So this is a good reason why I would just fold pre-flop, because if he is any good and knows that he can put on aggression, we are pretty screwed. Anyway, I agree with Anuj not to use disintegrate and to just straight out fold. Let's say he was to have disintegrated there and have the top pair. Now the other player knows he cannot use power points. So this guy could use engineer, this guy could use scanner. This guy could do basically whatever he wanted, knowing that Anuj cannot stop him. So it leaves you in a horrendous disadvantage. And even top pair is just not going to be enough. So we now are in a spot where the small blind 3x's and we have ace-6. We again basically can't use a combination unless it's scanner and disintegrate, but given we have an ace, I think it's perfectly reasonable to make a call. Again, if he's going to be putting on a lot of pressure, it really is quite a tough spot for us, but I think you've got to draw the line somewhere. So now our opponent decides to disintegrate the queen, which is quite confusing for us. I guess he's saying that he has an ace and he's worried about a straight coming in the future. Maybe he's trying to get rid of disintegrate, which definitely seems reasonable. But given that he didn't get rid of the ace, he's got a hand. I think he's got at least top pair, possibly two pair, but most likely some form of ace-x. So we have to proceed with serious caution. He makes it quite a large size, so leaves us in a not great spot. And now Anuj is deciding to disintegrate the ace. So he's now turning his top pair into a bluff. Given that we are we should be fairly sure that this guy is repping an ace or better, and I think it only makes sense that he's repping an ace and probably has an ace or better. I don't think that using disintegrate is going to be that useful most of the time. So ace high on a board with just one card is still a relatively strong hand. Turning our top pair now into nothing and a bluff is really odd. It does definitely put him in a really confusing situation, but I wouldn't turn this top pair into a bluff. I would definitely just call, see a turn, and then hopefully if he goes all in, you can use an engineer or something to that effect in the future. On the turn, we actually end up hitting a 6, which is obviously a great card. If the other guy had ace-x, let's say he has ace-9, it's left him in a really tough spot against the third pot bet. So yeah, the only hands that you're worried of is ace-jack. But now on the river, the ace comes out, which puts us in a really weird spot, because now it's pretty unlikely he had an ace, but he did end up calling the turn, so it's very confusing. So there are going to be a few combos of pocket jacks, and then a few combos of ace-x, and then some weird floats. I would just check to the opponent, because you already disintegrated the ace, so you said you're scared of it. So he's obviously going to bet if he's trying to rep it and has floated. Yeah, I prefer chicken. Good, Anuj does make the check. I presume this guy's going to go all in, and we're going to call. And he has ace-jack. So we have two callers in a row. Not the nicest. I guess disintegrating the queen was just to protect his top and bottom, and also to get rid of the card. Now we're in an awful spot where we are short stacked against someone with 3 power cards and 15 points. But sometimes that happens. So we face a limp, and the blinds have gone up to 100, 200, and we have queen 6 of diamonds. There's no way we want to be raising. We have a point disadvantage, and we flop a flush draw. We check it to our small blind, and he makes a c-bet. We call. Turn brings out a king, so now we have a straight draw to go along with our flush draw. Given that he's now bay 10, has now made this half pot size bet, it's a great spot to use engineer to try and hit the straight or the flush. Given that he's made this half pot size bet, it makes it really obvious for us to use the engineer card, because we can pick what we want, we can call his bet, and then on the river we can go all in to lock the board. So if we do hit our flush or we do hit a straight, he can't do anything about it. So this is a great spot for us. We engineer, we see a diamond, we pick the diamond, I presume. I think exploitatively picking the 7 of diamonds would be the best option, because then it's more likely that this guy has hit 2 pair, because we see another 3 out and we don't want the there's less of a chance that he's going to have hit a set or 2 pair. So we should pick the 7, in my opinion. Anyway, we picked the 3 diamonds. It's not that big of a deal. Cloning the engineer seems reasonable. It might not be the best idea, because now the next hand you're only going to have 3 points, so you're just going to lose that next hand, and therefore you can't play scanner. So maybe not using clone could have been a good idea. I mean, you're going to get another card anyway, so yeah. We hit, and now we can lock the board. Great spot, and it's very hard for him to fold with 4-1. Luckily for us, he hit 2 pair with a jack 3. Like I said, it's more likely he's going to have hit the 2 pair with jack 7. Anyway, we've managed to pick up EMP, which is great given our stack size and power point disadvantage. We have a great spot where we got folded to. So our opponent clearly doesn't understand the amount of pressure he could apply, which is something we should think about in the future. I don't think that folding there with any card is a good idea when you have 15 power points and the other guy only has 5. So we're just folding over some blinds. We managed to get our power points up to 9, which is great. We can now use a combination. 9-2, we're just going to have to check. We flop trips, amazing. Now we just need to figure out how to get value. I think checking is definitely reasonable, because we're just hoping that he's going to c-bet. I really don't mind putting chips into this pot now, because other than disintegrate, we don't have to be scared of much. So check raising could be an option. Check calling is also an option, and then leading turns, because there are so little things that can destroy your trips. So we decide to check it to him. He checks back, and we lead the turn. Definitely a standard play. The heart comes out on the river, which is not great. I think that given the size of the pot is still quite small, we're not too worried about him trying to use upgrade or reload to try and hit the flush. So I think we can still make a quarter-size pot bet. And then if we get a huge raise into us, we can think about folding. Anyway, we decide to EMP, which I don't like, because it can combo so well with Scanner and Engineers, particularly Engineer, when the stack to pot ratios are getting quite large. I mean, in one hand, the blinds would be 200, 400. So easily by the flop, you can make some great moves with this combination. Unfortunately, we have our third caller of the game and run into a flush, so when he doesn't even use any power points, so we're in trouble there. But he didn't raise, so the pot was kept small. That's great. 5-10. again, a hand that you could think about folding. I think it's a lot more reasonable to have limped than the 8 free offs hand we saw earlier. But again, I would probably advise to just fold. Try and get the 10 points so that you can use engineer and scanner, or engineer and disintegrate. Anyway, our opponent uses upgrade. And we have quite weak showdown, so I think just straight out folding is definitely a reasonable play. Another play could be disintegrating the 4 and calling. I think I would just prefer to fold, which we do. Now we're in a very tough spot. We decide to go all in but 1 chip. I don't necessarily think this is the best play. King 8 isn't that strong. I think I'll just go to a flop and then see what we can do from there. Scanner and engineer are very hard to play out of position, so I can see why it might be tempting to do this, but I don't really like this. Given he's got free power cards, he can easily call any 2 and manipulate the situation however he wants. So we pick scanner, we see the kings coming, we're obviously going to keep it even though spades are coming out, so we're actually going to hit a flush. Yeah, I think we're definitely keeping it, so we'll just see what the opponent does. He has 2 other power cards that cannot be X-ray, so it's very likely he can change the outcome of this board. We're obviously just going to want to check it to the river and then immediately go all in. We don't want to waste any of our power points with disintegrate on the turn. I mean, an 8 high flush is probably good enough. Our opponent decides to reload both cards, which is a good sign. He can see that you have at least a pair of kings, so he makes the fold because he must have had worse. That was a very lucky spot, and one that I don't really agree with. So now we use EMP and just decide to go all in. I think that because we have engineer, I would just prefer playing the hand as a limp. These combo really well together. Now we have 9 points, almost enough to use the best combo. But we have ace-2 suited, so we're definitely playing. I think with ace high, I would just try and get to showdown, turning it into a c-bet. It's fine if you can get him to use all his power points and then hopefully fold. That would be great. But I think just trying to get to showdown will be better, because you have the combination the next hand where you can definitely more easily apply the aggression. So we have 8-2 off here, but we do have the engineer upgrade. So the 8-3 hand that we limped earlier is a far worse play than limping with this ace 8-2, in my opinion. But I mean, folding it's obviously going to be fine as well. The blinds are getting quite crazy now, just gone up to 300, 600. Unfortunately, we've only got 9 high. We have no way to win this pot unless we make a bluff. I think I would just steer clear of it. We haven't got any draws to anything. So yeah, using disintegrate. We're using disintegrate here clearly to make a bluff and to get rid of the card. Given we have no connection to this board whatsoever, we have no equity once called, I would just prefer to just give up, not do this. We could have done it on, I wouldn't have mind doing it on the flop. On a flop of 2-8, getting rid of the queen and then betting. Because there's no connection, it's very hard for your opponent to make a power play that connects without using a combination power play. So then your min bet is now not so bad, and then you have a huge PowerPoint advantage over them, or they will just outright fold. So I think that's, if I was to decide to get rid of disintegrate, that's how I'd do it. Anyway, now we've managed to somehow get a great combination of cards. So losing this game would be outrageous, in my opinion. We got queen 10 off, we limp, we face an all-in, so obviously we're going to use engineer, try and find something. We hit an ace, so ace queen is obviously going to be enough to call the all-in. We're going to pick the ace, upgrade the 10, take the ace queen, hopefully we're good. Yep. And we win the game. Good stuff. So, all in all, it was a pretty good piece of play there by Anuj. I think the two things that he should definitely be looking to work on would be, number one, not playing so wide, especially out of position. And maybe also looking at the PowerPoint disadvantages and then adjusting your ranges accordingly. And the second thing would be how to use the EMP card. I think that he's missed on a few occasions in that session to use a really great combos of either scanner and EMP or engineer and EMP when the pot is big enough. If you are interested in getting in on a session review, make sure to get in touch with us on our website at op.poker.contact. This has been jlhmac for OP Poker. Ciao for now.